a very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you Social Story and Manoj and the entire team for putting together such a wonderful event. And thanks for having us here. I think I look at impact in a very different way because I look at the ESG portfolio for Sterlite Technologies, where our work is more concentrated around products, policies, as well as solutions for last mile connectivity. And therefore, impact is something that cannot be seen in silos or in isolation where you only look at one indicator. It has a much more multiplier effect on the overall transformation that we bring in the lives of people. When I look at it from the organization's perspective, it also has its dent on the grants and the resources that we are offering, and therefore I would like to talk about more in detail about the grant making and the impact side of resources, which is very important when we discuss this one. Impact without talking about data and the role of technology. And my question to you, Nitha, is how do you see that the grassroots organizations need to leverage technology and bring in data and more to make it more scalable?
So technology is something, it's invariable. I guess in the last 18 months, all of us have realized there is technology that has really helped us reach and stay connected. I'm sure most of you have heard of the tech for good or technology for good is something that we believe strongly. And for us, one of the pillars that we support under CSR is technology for good. Something that we believe that technology helps us scale for sure. While it's very important for us, it's not about technology per se or technology for the sake of technology that's being used. Technology could play multiple roles for sure. One for sure, I think the world that we are living in, as people call it, data is a new goal, right? So therefore, it's very important for us to build the programs, especially the social impact programs around having a technology platform, not just about having a platform to scale up, but even in terms of having the data in its right place and how best we are able to make use of the data that's available already. The second, it's also very important for us to capture some of the stories. While something that I really want to share here is, all of us do in our own scale extremely good work. It's very important for us to speak about what we have been doing. I really feel that the grassroots organizations are very modest about their work. There is a difference between boasting about your initiatives versus speaking more about what you have been doing. So therefore, not being modest, start speaking about what we are doing in your platforms, and know best what the technology can amplify that for sure. And therefore, make use of the social media platforms is very important for sure. As Ashwin was talking about these social entrepreneurs, there are plenty of them, you can be inspiration for them. So therefore, technology for good is very important for us to build platform, sustain and speak about it. The second important about technology is also about when we want to really have the knowledge transfer about our learnings or be it about success stories. It's very important for us to make such a platform to transfer the knowledge. The third most important for us is that being a corporate or the grassroots organizations, I think we all work in our comfort zone, in our own limited ways. I feel technology plays a greater role while having data in place, collaborations. Something that I really feel a best way to touch base with other corporates or with other NGOs. It's very important for us to have technology as a base built on from a scale point of view. The third most is, I think, the inertia about technology has gone now. I think all of us invariably use technology. So therefore, technology has to be part and parcel of your wherever you are reaching, be it for partnerships or be it as part of your entrepreneur, or you want to build data that can be used by multiple partners.
More of collaborations and make sure that the network effect becomes a multiplier of impact and hence also scaling the impact. So either of you, if you want to go first.
So I think network has become an over-exploited word, but maybe we all need the right kind of bridges to get access of good organizations, deserving ones, and at their end, right? So therefore networks like our Sugar Young Change Makers and any other social story, they are extremely important enablers for us to look at and identify the great work different organizations are doing. And also, I think from their perspective, it's important for them to understand the story at the other side of the table. So it both ways, and therefore these bridges are extremely important to the ecosystem.
The realization that's there that the government has our way without to scale up. We have our own limitations when we look at something from a scale point of view. We could do beautiful pilots, we can build nice stories, but at the end of the day, we have to have a collaboration, that's the government for sure, something that we really insist upon. The second most important for us is collaboration, not just about having working with the governments, we also look at collaboration between our own not-for-profits or NGOs.
Called Ashoka Innovators for the Public. We are a global network of social entrepreneurs in over 90 countries. We have been working with social entrepreneurs and finding them, supporting them, and working with them on various levels from last 41 years. More recently, we have also been working with young change makers, because somewhere while working with social entrepreneurs, we saw and realized that most of these social entrepreneurs started very young. And in some sense, I think the realization was also that they were social entrepreneurs, or they committed their lives to large-scale social change, because somewhere their growing up years transformed and gave them insights on how you can become change makers and how you can have that ability. So I'm very keen on sharing some of those insights on how we look at impact. And
now I'm attending the first physical event. So thank you so much, Socio Story and Manoj, for organizing this summit. I'm glad to be here, and I'm good to have all the speakers, Ashutosh from Microsoft, Abhishek from Brideo, Deepangata from Cargill, Sumana from Bank of America, and we have Abhishek from Brideo, and Vikas Yagvindu from Nippon Steel. So glad to be here and welcome everyone. I think technology is making all of us life easy, but at the same time it's getting difficult for millions of teachers and children across the country. And COVID has widened the digital gap basically, right? The COVID crisis has made all of us realize that how we can make learning more inclusive and more intuitive. And the future of education needs to be digital friendly, and to keep pace with the world, our schools needs to undergo a rapid digital transformation. 65% of India's government school children study in the government school. But do these schools have digital infrastructure to support digital learning? Are our teachers ready for that? So these are some of the questions where we all are gathering here to discuss that how we can collectively resolve the digital divide which is happening across the country. So welcome everyone once again, and we'll start with an opening remark. And I would request to Ashutosh just start with an initial kind of basic remark just to set the context. And thank you, Ashutosh.
Thanks, Abhishek. And it's so good. It does seem to. It is only 2 years, but it seems so long. I'd like to sort of step back, and this has been something which has been bothering me for a long time, and I say that with, for nearly 3 decades, right? And we knew this was coming. So when we are saying that there's a digital divide in education today, it's been existing for a very, very long time, right? We just turned our eyes away from it. And COVID just brought the stark reality in front of us, because we could see it happening right in front of us, in our houses, in our neighborhoods. If you really look at some of the statistics, 20% access exists in the urban centers for people, and in the rural area it's around 4 to 5%, give or take a few. I mean, it really doesn't matter. If that 4% even becomes 10%, it is hardly any change, right? But since when have we been talking about technology in education? It started way back in the 85, 86s, right? When it started with private schools. Early 90s, I remember Tamil Nadu was the first state which came up with a program to look at technology in schools, in the government schools, right, under a build, operate, transfer model. 3 decades. Where are we right now? We are nowhere. And the problem is we are looking at the issue from different perspectives. Somebody creates content, somebody is looking at providing infrastructure, but nobody is looking at all the areas. And you need to look at the lens from various perspectives. School education, higher education, vocational education. You need to look at it from an access, availability, affordability, and applicability perspective when you're looking at technology and education. These are all the things that we need to look at. And unfortunately, I lay the blame here on all of us. It's not the government alone which can solve the problem. It's not the civic society that can solve the problem. It's not the private sector. We are all doing our bit, right? I'm sure we've all heard about various companies doing so much for providing access to education, whether it is setting up schools, whether it is bringing technology into education, whether it's creating content, or whether it's the government providing broadband into villages, etc. But have we really looked at, we have the National Education NEP program which has come out now, but have we really looked at a national mission on educational access? And when you look at access as the word, access means a lot of things. It means the ability for the last kid or the last student to get the right content, the right access to technology, the right access to how that feedback mechanism will work in terms of learning what I'm learning, is it right or wrong? Am I getting my teachers or my mentors or my guides input to figure out where am I? Right. Various facets of that digital divide. And it's not just about getting a computer or a laptop or a phone in the hand of every student. It's about the right education pedagogy, it's about the right teacher training, it's about the right content and the right feedback mechanisms. So just talking about digital divide is not enough. Talking about access, affordability, applicability is going to be important. I'll just stop here before we get to solution.
Thank you, Ashutosh. I think I agree with all.
There is very little to say after what my esteemed co-panelist Ashutosh has already spoken about, how to move the cursor on the screen. That was 1989, he's right. Today is 2021. 8 minutes away from where I stay in a condo in Gurgaon, the narrative hasn't changed much for the help who works with me. So, and only, the only thing COVID has perhaps done is to exacerbate and expose the split in the cracks. So all of us, and so many of you in the audience, maybe perhaps far more than those of us in the panel here, are working on different dimensions of this problem. I mean, the problem is well stated, it's known to all. The digital divide exists. It doesn't seem to be going away tomorrow, but if we were to look at what does it mean in the context of education, I'll probably share a couple of my experiences as a practitioner, and you'll see it ties in so well with some of the things that Ashutosh spoke about. That is access the problem? It is one of the problems. Is quality infrastructure so that you can access the problem? It's one of the problems. So the beauty of the situation is that there is multiplicity of problems to solve that no one can solve alone. So whether you think about it in the context of collaboration, as the panel before us did, or having this massive network effect with several actors playing their role. Anyway, coming back to my story, I keep digressing. So in my experience of now looking at this from an ESG or CSR lens, I think two things that stay with me in the context of using tech for good in education. That whenever interventions, and I will specifically leave out names and such specificities for today's discussion, have the learner front and center, have a better chance, and there are many examples of those. Will you educate students the same way using technology as you would if there were no technology as an interface? Obviously the answer is no. And so therefore, throwing a bunch of tablets or infrastructure with connectivity and assuming that organically that will transform digital education and improve learning outcomes is not the answer. Several such pilots, small, medium, even large scale, have shown that these are some of the things that are not working so well. So just to sum up and borrow from wisdom next to me, holistic approach to any developmental challenge, and this being one of them, is definitely the way to go. As the discussion progresses, I'll try to share some other stories from my years of practice. But I'll stop here and hand it back to Abhishek.
I decided to wear a Brillo jacket so that I can differentiate myself. So a little bit about my company. So we are just a 7-year-old company, Bain Capital backed. In 7 years, the kind of work we have done, both in terms of how we run the business and how we do our impact, has been phenomenal. I lead the ESG practice globally for this company. Now, if we look at the digital divide, I think the digital is the enabler. This digital is the one which actually unifies. And if the best democratization happens in this world is the digital, because digital doesn't understand the haves and have-nots or what's your status when you connect with the digital connectivity, right? Pandemic was the best use case. I think we all had a life because of digital. Connectivity in the mobile devices we have is far, far higher than any of the countries we are talking about. It's not the digital divide or not having infrastructure is a problem only for countries like India. When we work in the other markets, we see that there is a divide, there is a infrastructure challenges in the other countries as well, because it is going to take some time when everybody comes on digital. We have 1 billion plus phone in India, and I think in this room most of us have multiple devices, right? And yesterday I was talking to some of my folks here, and saying time will come when human evolution happens, maybe our ears will come with a Bluetooth enabled, right? I mean, that's how the evolution is going to happen, where every single organs what we are using have something technology into it, right? Whether it's a ear, your eyes, you have now smartwatches, maybe we're talking about having new shirts and clothing which can change colors, change patterns as you want for that day morning, right? So that's how the progress of technology is happening. I remember 4-5 years back we said the technology is a slave to us, or we have become a slave to us. The conversations have gone far, far ahead from that, right? Now coming back to the education issues what we are discussing today, I think the challenge is obviously infra is a big challenge. The easiest solution I can give is that if we start donating your device which you are not using, I think we can reach half the masses, half the children we are talking about. Just each one of us in this room, look around you, there will be some chargers, there will be some phone, some device lying in your house which you're not going to use. Clean that thing, give it to somebody.
I think much has been said already. I think I'll just probably build on what my esteemed co-panelists have already said. I think what we need to do and think about is very, very foundational. We are talking about AI platforms today. As we are navigating through our phones and our machines, somebody is always listening to us. Consumer behaviors are getting recorded. So we have reached somewhere else as it relates to technology and digital today, right? And paradoxically, our country is a country of paradoxes. So all the haves and have-nots, Abhishek, you alluded to it, right? There are digital have-nots and haves that's also happening, and it's not today's phenomenon. It's been happening for decades, and it's probably just coming to the fore today as we are seeing it play out during the COVID times. Now there are so many different facets to it. I come from a food and agri company, and we have seen how it has played out as it relates to the agriculture ecosystem per se, in the farming communities and all of that. But as we're talking about education today, I just want to talk about a couple of things that comes to my mind. When you're looking at accessibility, when you're looking at affordability, when you're looking at infrastructure, the entire gamut of it, I think again, just building on what Ashutosh mentioned, Sumana alluded to, what we are not probably really able to do is really look at the foundational piece of it as to looking at what are the foundational needs for a child to learn, and therefore, as practitioners, as people who understand this space, bringing people together, policymakers, us as corporations, development organizations, like a lot of you who are sitting here, what do we do collaboratively? And I know collaboration has been a buzzword for forever, but have we really did we really go deep into it to really extract the meaning of it and be intentional about it? I think that's a food for thought that all of us need to really think about. The other aspect, gender equity is something that is very close to my heart. I work in this space pretty closely within the organization and also the communities that they serve. Now, when we look at that aspect of it, and we have seen that play out with nutrition, with food, that's a subject that we work on very closely. There is always a divide, and the same plays out in the digital space as well. The women in the household, or the girl, a school-going girl, gets access to a digital device, be it a mobile phone, be it a laptop. She's the last one to get access to it in the family.
Story for inviting, and I'm privileged to be part of this panel discussion. This topic which we are discussing about digital divide, it's look good, but I term this as disparity between when we talk about a digital divide. Right? There is a technology and infrastructure. When you look to the urban and the rural areas, disparity between region at the household level. So what we are talking about, if you look at the figures, it looks the seriousness of the problem that we are discussing, right? Even the 12 electricity is important, internet connectivity is important, which we are talking about for bridging that. We are the second largest after China. We have in terms of number of schools, in number of 320 million learners, and we are talking India as to make it a superpower. The generations are not getting that education due to this after the post-COVID when schools got shut down, and the learning takes a setback, right? So since I represent ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel, which is a metal and mining company, and we are not into the technologies, but when we are looking as a CSR guy, when I was looking, the company came into existence in 2019. The issue that the area where we must focus on the COVID came, and we felt that this is the one area where we should focus, because it is when you go deep into the problems of it and its impact as a India as a whole, as a society, it has larger impact. So we have developed a program on digital Pathshala, and as a company we will be an enabler, right? And we are forming a partnership with the government and looking for some innovative solutions to it, which can really help, and this inequality can be bridged. So many of the organizations I personally interacted with them. There are a lot of solutions to it. Even when we talk about electricity, 12 hours electricity, there is only 45% household have the 12 hour electricity, right? Some organizations come with a hybrid model to it. The problem issues is not only providing infrastructure, it is all to composite. It has to be looked in totality, right? And in a very practical and realistic way, where teacher who is imparting education, their capacity needs to be built. When digital education or e-learning happens, the parents plays an important role. Like for our own kids, we had to take care of our kids. Otherwise, the learning which classes are done through online, but assessment, more parenting has to be done. So the rural India, when we talk about where they are working for the livelihoods, right? So how to use that technology and for making their kids assessment. So there are many ways, and it has to be looked in totality, not only in infrastructure. What my previous
All of us private sector, the civil society, individuals, the government have been approaching these problems from their perspective, trying to address. There are companies which are doing teacher training, there are companies which are creating content, there are companies which are giving away laptops or desktops or whatever. I think, and there's a government which is doing its own stuff. I think the role for the problem is that we are all solving what we believe is the problem. And we are trying to do it in our own small way, which is very good. And I think in the previous panel, we also talked about, Nirvay talked about this, that how much money can you keep putting in? Right? It has to be consistent. And the problem that, and the only way to solve that is if you come up with, we do have a national education policy, right? It focuses on what education should be, should look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years, right? What we should have, actually, is a group of people who come together and create a national mission for educational, and actually contribute to this piece of the gap. Because what happens today is when a corporate organization starts looking at CSR, and I've been in CSR for quite some time, and I know how we think, right? We try and do something which we know we are good at. We try to do something which is an extension of our abilities. So if I'm a technology company, I will do technology-based education or technology education, right? But, and many of us do stretch the envelope. I know in Microsoft we're trying to stretch the envelope. Every organization does that. But we don't do that because there is no enabling framework. The role of the government should be to create that enabling framework where companies can step forward and do something beyond what they're really doing. And you're right, identifying the gaps. The point is we're not identifying the gaps. So that national mission on educational access should help identify what those gaps are. And that's when the civil society, government, state governments, or everybody, public sector units, for example, can all step in and do what they're good at, right? So you have a huge public sector enterprise over here in this country. They have huge amount of CSR and they have far more reach than possibly a lot of our private sector organizations, right? They can actually look at setting up, why don't you think out of the box? Rent a phone, rent a laptop, right? I know in Bangladesh, for example, they have these ladies who are on boats who take laptops to villages for people to get access.
The organizations for bridging that capacity building of that on this. So what we discussed, the model depends upon state to state, where the technologies are reached to the end user, what is the gap, and that we are addressing, where in totality, where technology well as the capacity building is required, where we are reaching out. So the only way for us is to collaborate with the organizations who has that solution and story to say. So we do collaborate with the organizations, the change maker on ground, and also partnering and working with the government for scalability of that initiative.
Thank you, Vikas. And maybe come up with something which is entrepreneurial-like, fair enough. But if you're training them coding because there are so many supposedly jobs out there, and they're good paying jobs, and as we used to say 30 years ago, if you become a computer software developer, you will sit in an air-conditioned office, because that time, that was the only offices which used to have air conditioners, which were those which had computers, right? That's wrong. So don't train kids coding for the sake of making them coders. Yeah, some of them will become computer scientists. They will become computer developers. That's what they want to be. But please, for heaven's sake, don't tell them at young ages what they need to become. Yes, give them the ability to think logically, to be creative, to become innovative. And that's what, if you're teaching coding because of that, yes, it's good.
Telemedicine could be very effective, and in fact, if we look at the overall perspective of digital health, this could be still even more effective. And to me, telemedicine, actually I like to deliberate more on digital health. right from creating awareness to data building to early stage diagnostics, providing treatment, post-treatment monitoring, using the analytics and artificial intelligence to build on the data that we have gathered and hence enrich the SOP to deliver telemedicine. And we did not have too much success stories except for some models where Apollo was leading telemedicine, but the footprint was about 500,000 telemedicine consultations. Then we had an Uttarakhand model where the pharmacists are allowed to work in the villages, and my friend Dinesh Agarwal just narrated to me the story. And these pharmacists are able to capture data linked with the district hospitals where the doctors are sitting, and they not only provide for the prescription, and then the pharmacist can deliver the medicines at the village level. All of us during the COVID time have seen the miracles happening. We have seen teleconsultation becoming the norm. Doctors were unwilling to meet. There was nobody to carry the patient to our facility. Patients were so weak they couldn't move anywhere. So the only recourse forcibly was to have telemedicine. And I have been a patient myself during those days, and I think only the courtesy telemedicine, not exactly in the manner that we understand telemedicine, but I was able to share my report, I was able to consult the doctor over the phone. Each day there is a learning, each day the technology enablement is making it much more efficient. So this journey is, the rewards are going to be bigger, the journey is just begun, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gopal.
Right. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. As we've been discussing, it's not a new concept. It's been around for quite some time, but it has been challenging for it to really take off. And that is something that the COVID era has accelerated in a very big way, because obviously it was not feasible and also not safe for people to really go in for in-person consultations. So there was definitely a behavior change that we saw there, and there was a shift in terms of the demand for these services, which really went up. Now the government, of course, tried to respond to that quite quickly, and we came out with these telemedicine guidelines, which I would say it is going to be still something that you would see an evolution. It will still be something which is work in progress, because digital, especially a space where we are always learning something new. And the more these guidelines are implemented by state governments, the more feedback we get from the ground in terms of what's working, what's not working, what needs to be improved. You will definitely see other versions of these guidelines coming out as well. But I think it was a very necessary step, because it provided the much needed legitimacy to this space and went along with the demand side increase that we were seeing. So I think this was an important measure. But there's a lot more that we need to do, and we'll perhaps come to that when we speak a bit about the challenges and the opportunities in terms of really maximizing the potential of telemedicine.
Thanks, Amish.
Well, good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be part of this panel. I think I was also listening to the previous panel where we were discussing about digital divide, and now we are talking about telemedicine, which is a linked topic if you look at it. And yeah, there is always this feeling that though it has been 20 years, we are not moving forward kind of a thing. But what struck me was that if you look at 2015 when we started Swachh Bharat Mission, that was something very simple. But then that is when we realized how much work needs to be done related to Swachh Bharat itself. So if you look at from there and from Swachh Bharat to technology, there is a journey that needs to be done. And in 20 years, whatever has been it's happening in digital growth. We have been, as a nation, working for the world, developing things globally. But when it came to looking at our own selves, there was a lot of lack. So yes, the pandemic has definitely created a need for telemedicine, and the medical fraternity also started thinking that, yeah, this is another medium of concern. Earlier, though there were telemedicine opportunities, all stakeholders were not willing to take up that path. But today that has become inevitable and it's happening. Also, if you look at more than 70% of the medical facilities are based out of urban region. That's where we feel a lot more things have to be done, and that's where CSR can definitely play a role. Because even if you look at primary health centers, there are more than 43% primary health centers which doesn't have doctors on a regular basis.
Creating a hospital for change. Mr. Saurabh Singh.